thanks to all of you. So good to see you here, recognizing faces. I'm excited to see all of you. My lens, what we're going to talk about this morning is really how the things that we're making great progress, right? This is amazing, the explosion of technology and getting the focus of getting technology in people's hands. And even for states that are pretty far along, the challenge continues to be, how does the person stay in charge of what they're using, get clear choices? So the focus for me is going to be really what I'm learning about that. So here we go. I always put in more slides than we're going to cover. Don't worry. You're gonna have more slides. We're going to whip through some of them, but I wanted you to have copies of them, whether we cover them or not. So we're going to talk about the future as person-driven. We're a person-centered field, which is fabulous. Person-centered means I see you. I'm going to pull in all the things that are specific to your needs. Person-driven is an elevation from that. I understand that in our system, things were made by a brain like mine instead of a brain like yours, for the most part. So we're going to work together to try to figure out the accommodations that you need. We're going to build them together so that instead of you looking to me for what to do next, we're building tools that allow you to self-propel through the documents, through the strategies, through the sequence of things, etc. I always start with this question: how many of us are social justice workers in the room? If you could just raise your hands, get a sense. Yeah, great. There are a lot more people here raising their hands than in most places that I go. And here's why we talk about it. You know, when you think about how do you talk about your job, this is how I describe my job. My job is to level the playing field for people with disabilities to have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. That is the actual definition of social justice. For marginalized groups of people to have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. I think this is one of the keys to helping us move forward around staying person-driven. There's some kind of weird loop of sound going on. Okay. So I think this is one of the things that helps us turn in the right direction, is to understand social justice, because there's a lot of information out there already around how do we address systemic issues, which marginalization always brings with it. If you were not at the table inventing, talking about your needs, then things have been built without you, for you, that need to be examined. And when you look at groups who are very experienced in social justice, they've come up with some wisdom about how to pay attention to some of those things. And as we all know, right, diversity, equity, inclusion, teams don't often have people with disabilities represented. But we do want to align with these teams because there are people, they understand the same issues that we're going to be talking about. So we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, or we call it JEDI. I guess it's justice, equity, disability, and inclusion, which I love the JEDI teams. Take a look at the categories of marginalization. So I'm not just looking at the individual, but the systemic challenges for getting what you need in that system. The most familiar story for most people to recognize is women, all you women in the room, 80 cents to the dollar of the male who's in our position. Why is that still happening? We've been talking about this for a long time. So even though we know, even though our hearts are in the right place and our minds are in the right place, there are still structural problems that stop us from resolving it really quickly. So for example, it's pretty common knowledge now, but it's recently common knowledge that women couldn't own their own bank account or build their own credit until 1974. That means when I was growing up, my mom couldn't have a bank account in her name, even though she managed the money in our house. So those kinds of structural things we're going to talk a little bit about today. So we don't want to bring the same problems with us that already exist. Some of the things that already exist, we talk about most of the tools that we're using were built by a brain like mine instead of the person observing. So there's that investigation into the tools and how we break things down. Task analysis is a great example of this. Task analysis starts at the beginning and breaks things down into very small steps until we get to the end. Universal design is based in the visual brain, which starts at the end. Here's where we're going. Now here are the steps to break it down. So look, examining the tools that we use, examining how we train, how we look at things. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the ahas I've had over my career. I started at 13, I'm 64, so what that means is I've made a lot of mistakes. And I've seen us all make, in the field, kind of this pendulum of trying, but not always moving completely forward. So here's some of the ahas for me. We teach, when we train people, often hand over hand. In fact, you might have learned that in school. But that's in direct opposition for our nervous system, because our nervous system is getting the most feedback from your hands, your mouth, and your feet. That means when I put my hand on yours, I can't help but engage the startle reflex. That means if I'm teaching you how to use an iPad because it's new to you, and I'm taking your finger and I'm pointing, then I'm going to measure your capacity or your abilities based on a moment where your engagement is affected by your internal system saying, hey, what is this? What do you want from me? What am I supposed to do? As opposed to hand under hand, which allows me to say, put your finger on mine. See how I'm touching this? So that you can come forward at the right pace. This actually means that we are teaching cue dependence. I'm so sorry, you all, but we did it, right? Cue dependence comes from us. This hand over hand piece is teaching you to wait for me before you do it yourself, as opposed to if my hand is underneath, I can feel when you come forward, when your intrinsic motivation for mastery, when your realization, like, wait, I can do this, get out of my way. I can notice that if your hand is on top of mine rather than underneath mine. So these kinds of ahas of, hey, how come all of this time we've been teaching that way? And I challenge every single one of you to take a look at how you teach with your hands, because this is a very strong teaching method. When I got involved in deaf blindness, suddenly everybody on my caseload was doing better, simply because I was getting better with tactile delivery and more succinct communication. John and Julie Gottman are relationship experts. You can go look up their stuff. They say something that was really profound to me. The first 3 minutes of your interaction with someone is going to affect the outcome it's going to determine the outcome of the interaction, regardless of what you do in between. Now, this becomes really important when you think about things like this young man, Naoki Higashida, who wrote the book, The Reason I Jump. It's a young man now an older man, now a man, a young adult, who wrote this book when he was 10 with his therapist. And the whole thing goes through just an interview. Why do you flop your hands? Why do you jump? And he gives his response. This is the one that really got me around that first 3 minutes. And he's saying, the question is, why do you ignore us when we're talking to you? And he says, when somebody's far away and you don't realize they're talking to you, well, that's what happens to me when you're right in front of me. So it would be helpful if you said our names first. It profoundly changed my interactions with everyone, just like hand under hand when I started hanging out in the deaf-blind community. When I learned to make that shift, something different started happening for everyone, because I was adapting my ability to accommodate people based on their need. When I read this, I realized that first 3 minutes, when I start to interact with a lot of folks that I've worked with on the spectrum, I'm evaluating their capacity, their ability, their interest in that first 3 minutes, when they may or may not be with me yet. They might have eye contact with me and not be with me yet. So this whole lens of how do I start to pay attention to the habits that we have, that we've built into the system, becomes really important. And I started to get really curious about that and started taking notes on people queuing. This is actually my first, we now have a formal sheet, but we started just, on Notability, an app, a note-taking app, just, tallying cues. For 1 hour and 15 minutes, I watched this woman support this young man in a job, had a lot of high needs. And at the end, I asked her, how often do you think you're cueing him during this shift? And she embarrassingly said, I know it's at least 7 to 10 times. And it was 454. When it first happened, I thought, that's crazy. Something's wrong with me and how I'm evaluating this. And so then I started working with teams where I would charge one person with filming the event while I was tallying while we were observing somebody. And then we would go back and count it together. And this is a little bit horrifying to find out about ourselves, but we are 40% off. That means of our own awareness of how often we are cueing. It's not that, it's also understanding how we cue. So there's lots of, voice cues, hand over hand, physical prompts, gestures, body blocks, doing it on behalf of the person. I would say, again, I would recommend everybody try this. Start to film how we're supporting each other and how we're supporting folks that we serve to get a sense of how much we're doing unconsciously at this point in time. That's where we start to dig. That's where we start to understand that, oh, we've got some habits that we really want to look at here. Because as a tech trainer, as a tech specialist, whatever that means, we bring technology into people, but how we offer it, how we teach it is going to affect what we're going to see. What I see most often in teaching technology, and we've been teaching tech for more than a dozen years, is that I will come in and do something with the individual, and they'll say, wow, how did you get him to do that? He never does that with us. And it's really the shift in how I'm offering it, how I'm teaching it, and also to understand that my job is to model it because you need to see why it's worthwhile. I need to bring in models. I have to have tech savvy, offer it, invite you in without looking at your mastery first. So if we want to take a look at changing our own habits, Mark Twain so wisely said, a habit can't be tossed out the window. It's got to be coaxed down the stairs one step at a time, which means knowing that I'm cueing more often than I do, I have to stay curious. I have to understand that I'm going to default to my habits simply because that's how we roll as human beings. So we use this quote from Dr. Chisholm, who worked with Annie Sullivan, the teacher of Helen Keller, saying to her, if a house collapsed on a child, all of us would come running in pitchforks and no one would stop digging until the child was found. That's our task here, is to keep digging until we find Helen Keller. I think that in a system of marginalization, that's our job, period. To keep unearthing the systemic challenges that stop you from showing up with all of your skill sets. I think everybody in this room could think of an example of someone that we've worked with that might have a lot of behavior plans in place or other kinds of supports in place. And their functioning skill might be diagnosed at some specific, level. But then when you watch them do their favorite thing, you see that there's a different person showing up. So to understand that I really want to find the individual first when I'm teaching technology means I want to see how you're playing games. I want to see how you use entertainment on the device. I'm not so interested in teaching you a hygiene routine. I want to get familiar with what when you're enjoying yourself, what's the best that you can do? Because that's the place of teaching for all of us, right? So we look at, okay, every time I'm cueing, what can I put in place, even low and high tech things? How do I build structures that every time you're looking at me for information, you are now I'm tasked with, okay, what can I build here so I can shift out of the way? From simple like this bottom left-hand side, here's my tracker for understanding which rooms I've already addressed, which nursing, on the nursing floor, which patient rooms I've already replaced trays in. First by that red column of marking all the isolation rooms that I can't go into. Also having a check back column if there was a nurse or a doctor in there at the time, etc., to assessing the needs for the trays in storage, to ordering the items as backup. The woman who does this now, that picture on the right-hand side, there's inventory that we track and we used to order on her behalf because she's not a reader and writer. And as soon as we added tags, right, visual tags, she now does all of the inventory for her own job. And actually started doing expiration dates and then started doing that for the main warehouse. To financial literacy, what are visual ways for you to understand work? Because the difference between work and everything else is earning money and making choices with that money. So from visual budgeting to visual shopping, again, for things that are motivating, those shopping lists on the right-hand side, starting with snacks and things you like to make with a bunch of choices that you can add in, but you only have so much money. So what choices do you make? And visually, I can see when I'm out of money or the effect on the money that I have given the choices that I'm making. So it's just creativity, creativity to how do I create step-by-step structures that allow you to self-propel through learning and remembering how to do something. Like we start with silly films with folks to learn devices because it's so much fun. We see the best skill sets come forward right out the gate. And you can go to our website and use these silly films to teach. They're free on our website. And we, step by step, again, not only does the individual gain skill and be able to reference it, but now we've got a tool that allows people to become trainers that use more accessible structures to train other people. And there's nothing like someone with lived experience teaching how to use devices in the way that's necessary, or more flexible or more broad than the way that I thought it could be used. I invented an app, and I learned more about how it could possibly be used from the people that we support who are using it in ways I hadn't even thought of, and I invented it. So when we're talking about change, we want to talk about, we think about it in terms of top-down, bottom-up change, creating an ethos of curiosity. If I want to get better at really being person-driven, my staff has a line item called "How do we get out of the way?" And we keep joking, we keep lightheartedness about, wow, we have these habits we keep running into. How do we keep investigating the right tools to move through? How am I doing with time, you guys? I'm just going to do a quick check. Mary, I see
You're
your face.
you're
Okay.
you're fine. You're fine, Jennifer. You got 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Because I realize I'm more of a fire hose presenter when because I'm very passionate about it and I'll start moving too fast or just keep talking too much. When we're looking at change, we want to, again, top down, bottom up. When I'm working with large teams, we make sure that the admin has very clear goals specified about the integration of technology in their training and in their onboarding for both customers that they serve and staff. And then the bottom up, that the direct service providers have tools in their hands, understand how to write goals and track goals connected to technology. This developing a culture of learners and staying fascinated is everything. I've got a small team and we constantly talk about this because it's very hard not to feel like the expert. We all want to be the expert. We're all very passionate about what we do for a living. The recognition that we find is most helpful is to understand that although my good heart is in place, and although my vision for you is positive, if I'm not addressing the systemic problems, then I might be affecting your life for the time that we're together. But as soon as I leave, it leaves with me. And we see this constantly, especially around technology tools that require some savvy for the direct service provider to be able to support and demonstrate and continue to be able to build and grow skills, with the goal of building and growing skills for the people we support. So this is an ongoing ethos challenge of how do we continue to stay curious? How do we continue to talk to each other and even develop language to stay fascinated? We have a teacher, long-term teacher who invented this kind of realization that he realized that when he's feeling better than or worse than his peers, he's like, I'm smarter than you, or I'm never going to get it. Those two things is this kind of inner voice. And he realizes when he's talking to himself in this way, his shoulders start to get involved. He starts to feel a little like, oh, this isn't working. And as soon as he does that, he catches himself and he throws his hands in the air and yells, fascinating. And it takes the shame right out of that moment so he can actually keep learning and keep building new skills. So in our company, you will see people walking around the work floor, throwing their hands in the air, yelling, fascinating. So this ethos of curiosity for all of us, we are the tech experts in this room, right? We've got a bunch of people who've really been focusing on this for a long time. We say curiosity is more important than conviction. We are in a time of great discovery and great possibility. I mean, AI alone, are you kidding? There's so much to do here. So how do I keep understanding how to learn? How do I continue to look at the experts on this, which are people with intellectual developmental disabilities? How do I partner together with the individuals that we serve and hire people with intellectual developmental disabilities as our peers in this process? It calls me to invent the tools that allow my partner with IDD to be in front of the room, whether I'm there or not. So building presentation tools, building teaching tools that are based on very visual step-by-step structures, like I showed you before, are something that we're doing long-term. We want, right, long-term dynamic planning points, because we know that when you're talking about social justice, we're talking about a long haul. We're talking about a lifelong path of continuing to investigate where we're stuck, ourselves as individuals and as a field. Some of the beautiful things that we can learn from other social justice groups, specifically folks who have been working on the discrimination of people based on the color of their skin. When you're talking about race, you're talking about a group of people who have very thoughtfully, very long-term come together with some pretty serious wisdom. So there are sayings like, I want to call you in instead of call you out, which we can borrow from really, people who've been doing this work for a long time. So this calling each other in instead of calling each other out means that I, Jennifer White, as the lead of my team, as an expert in technology, am going to continue to tell you the stories of me blowing it. That fascinating moment when I go, oh, look, I reached up somebody's hand again. Oh, look, I did this again. Because this curiosity, building an ethos of curiosity, means a kind of companionship in learning that isn't necessarily fueled by our culture. So for us to build this culture internally helps us partner and in ways of equity that we're not always looking at. Part of the systemic strategies are going to be some structural things. So identifying the measure, what is it that we're looking at? Where do we start? How do we move forward? How do we track our movement in this? And then how do we celebrate where we are? And every staff meeting, we report out some celebration. We do some community PR. We connect with our high schoolers because they're tech experts, right? Along with the 7-year-old in your life, very serious tech skills. How do we invigorate our champions? How do we build our structure within our company so that we're creating new positions for expertise? How do we involve our customers? Again, strategic planning. KPIs is a term that we don't all know in our field, but after you've had a strategic plan for your company, KPIs are key performance indicators that show you how you're going to get there, like some timelines and measurements. These kinds of things can scare us, but they can be very generalized. Strategic plan examples can literally be, okay, between January and June, each department is going to start looking at barriers with a new tool. Like, how do we shift what we say? Our term is compliance to alliance. Not compliance like I'm the boss of you, but compliance like you have to look to me to get to this information. How do I help you build the tool so you can do it yourself? That's the shift from compliance to alliance. So during this 6-month period, we can just say every department, we're going to ask you to be curious and look at these things. That's a real goal. That's a real measurable goal. And then those cues, like we're going to take film of 6 different people training somebody across our departments and take a look at our cueing habits. We're going to put calendars in our calendars. We're going to have a video meeting every week or every month with consultants specifically about these tools. We're going to pick a new how-to document, like how to make your silly film or how to do those different things, and we're going to review them. And then key performance indicators can be specifically the dates and who's going to do it, measuring the outcome of it. You can use our library. You can write to me and say, hey, we'd like a library of those how-to documents. So we can put our first goal as we're going to review these and see if they're helpful for our company and getting people more independent and autonomous with their own technology tools. One of the things that happens a lot is we don't even evaluate how people are using technology. So how, and I can tell you from working across the country and having many revisions of our own, we don't have a good one yet anywhere. Like I've worked on mine, but I'm still writing in circles all around it. So I'm not, we haven't really captured a good tool to really handle, I think, evaluation yet. Part of this is also to understand that the staff, in many places, we have people with technology in hand, but staff who don't know how to support or model the technology. So in our company, we have an individual development plan that people write when they first work with us. And then every year, as part of their annual plan, we're talking about how they're going to focus on technology. They make other goals for themselves, but they tell me where they are around tech, given what we're doing, and what they want to learn. And then together we build a plan for them so that they continue to gain skill. Here's some of the initial things that we do for customer intake and eval. Essentially, what are you using? How are you using it? And then we go through all the ways we're using technology and take a look at if you have access to that. What kind of sites, what kind of apps, what kinds of evaluation and training could you use? Now, we start there before we do anything. Before we talk about technology, we all want to, for us at Able Opportunities and what we're seeing around the country is to take a look at where we're stuck in our own habits, where we're missing the structural pieces to help move us forward, and especially to be looking at the person-driven strategies so that when we're talking about moving forward, we're talking about raising the capacity for people with intellectual developmental disabilities to work to be able to propel through their own teaching tools so that they can master skills and reference the steps for doing something, but also so that people with IDD can be trainers of other individuals to do the same thing. So fascinating. Now we're ready to talk about technology. I'm going to be talking about employment skills or tech for employment today. And I know there's a lot of other beautiful individuals on site here that have some amazing skills to be talking about. I hope you enjoy your day and I hope you stay fascinated.
It's funded under the contract with the state of Tennessee, and we're really appreciative of all of their help.